Lawyer kicks his wife and child out of the house. Years later she becomes a judge. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Sarah Lawrence's world shattered when her husband, Mark, handed her the divorce papers. It wasn't just the end of their marriage. It was the end of a life she had built around him. Mark, a confident lawyer with a reputation for winning, had decided she no longer fit into his plans. He sought full custody of their daughter, Grace, and used every legal trick to edge Sarah out, leaving her with barely enough to survive. Humiliated and broken, Sarah was forced out of their upscale home, her world reduced to a small apartment in a less-than-ideal neighborhood. With Grace's custody entirely in Mark's favor, Sarah could only see her on weekends. The transition was harsh. Sarah, once the devoted homemaker, had little work experience and no college degree. Her savings dried up fast, and the reality of starting over in her 30s hit like a wave. But beneath the pain of betrayal, a spark of determination ignited. She refused to be seen as a failure by Mark or anyone else. If he thought she was weak, she would prove him wrong in the one arena he respected: the law. She enrolled in night classes at a community college, studying relentlessly during the day and waiting tables in the evening to make ends meet. Mark, meanwhile, continued his upward trajectory, becoming one of the city's most sought-after lawyers. To him, Sarah was a closed chapter, until the day he received a call about their daughter's behavior at school. Grace, who had always been the center of Sarah's world, had become distant and withdrawn, a shadow of the bright child she once was. Mark struggled to connect with her, but his demanding schedule left little time for the deeper conversations she seemed to need. Sarah, meanwhile, had become a fixture at the local library, burning the midnight oil. Her focus sharpened, her passion for justice grew, and she found herself fascinated by the intricacies of the law. She felt empowered in a way she never had before, discovering that knowledge could be a weapon as powerful as any legal tactic Mark had used against her. 3 years later, Sarah's perseverance paid off. She graduated top of her class and earned a scholarship to a law school known for turning out some of the best in the field. Balancing studies, a part-time job, and her limited time with Grace, she pushed through every obstacle. Despite the bitterness between her and Mark, she kept her focus on her goal, determined to prove that she was more than the ex-wife he had cast aside. The years flew by, and Sarah began to make a name for herself in legal circles, first as an advocate for underprivileged clients and later as a rising star in criminal law. Eventually, Sarah's tireless dedication caught the attention of the governor, who appointed her as a judge. The title of Judge Sarah Lawrence was a badge of honor, a testament to the strength that had carried her through the darkest times. It was a victory, but it came with a bittersweet edge. Grace had grown up in the years of their separation, and while Sarah had fought to keep their bond strong, she knew the distance between them had taken a toll. As Sarah settled into her role, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come. From a woman left with nothing, she had clawed her way back, and now she held the power to shape justice in her hands. But as much as she had moved forward, the shadow of her past with Mark lingered. She knew they would cross paths again. It was only a matter of time. That moment arrived sooner than she expected when a high-profile custody case landed on her docket, involving none other than Mark. He represented a wealthy client embroiled in a bitter battle over the rights to their child. Sarah read through the case file, her pulse quickening as she saw Mark's name listed as lead counsel. It had been years since she'd seen him in person, but the memories of his ruthless tactics came flooding back. On the day of the trial, Sarah sat on the bench, her expression stern as she observed Mark walking into the courtroom. He looked older, the sharpness of his features now softened by age, but the confident swagger remained. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and Sarah could see the flicker of recognition in his gaze, quickly masked by his professional demeanor. Mark's arguments were eloquent and calculated, as always. He painted his client's case with a narrative that tugged at the jury's emotions, manipulating the facts to suit his agenda. But Sarah, with years of experience and an intimate understanding of his methods, saw through every subtle twist he employed. She kept her composure, listening intently, But internally, she was preparing for what would come next. After a long day in court, Sarah returned home, her mind spinning with thoughts of the trial and her unexpected reunion with Mark. As she sifted through the details of the case, a nagging feeling tugged at her. Something wasn't adding up in Mark's narrative. She decided to dig deeper, knowing that a judge's impartiality didn't preclude thorough investigation. What she discovered in the coming days would change everything, setting the stage for a dramatic reckoning. Sarah spent long hours after the trial's adjournment, reviewing every piece of evidence presented in the case. She meticulously examined Mark's client's financial records, the communication logs, and even the seemingly minor details buried in the case file. Her instinct told her that there was more beneath the surface, something Mark was hiding. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man who had once turned her life upside down was involved in something more nefarious. One evening, as she sat in her quiet office, Sarah came across a series of financial transfers linked to offshore accounts in the client's name. On the surface, they seemed legitimate, but when she cross-referenced the dates and amounts, she noticed irregularities. The transfers coincided with Grace's tuition payments and even some unexplained deposits that had appeared in Sarah's own bank account years ago, back when she struggled to make ends meet. A cold realization washed over her. These funds had been funneled through a network of accounts, obscuring the true source. Sarah's heart pounded as she pieced together the evidence, realizing that Mark might have been involved in laundering money through their daughter's accounts. He had used Grace as a pawn in his financial schemes, creating a web of deceit that spanned years. And now, he was using the same tactics to manipulate the current case. The weight of the discovery pressed heavily on Sarah's chest. It wasn't just about winning or losing a legal battle anymore. It was about her daughter's safety, their fractured family history, and the lies that had been woven into the fabric of their lives. She knew she had to be careful. If she confronted Mark too directly, he would undoubtedly use his influence to turn the situation against her, just as he had during their divorce. Sarah decided to consult a trusted friend and mentor, Judge Robert Miller, an experienced jurist known for his integrity. They met at a small cafe late one evening, far from the prying eyes of the courthouse. Over steaming cups of coffee, Sarah laid out her findings, her voice barely above a whisper. Judge Miller listened intently, his expression growing more serious with every word. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, a contemplative look in his eyes. "Sarah, you need to tread carefully. If what you're saying is true, it could not only bring down Mark but could also unravel a network of corruption. You'll need solid proof before taking any action." Sarah nodded, aware of the risks. "I'll gather more evidence. But if he's using Grace's accounts, she deserves to know the truth. I can't let him use her as leverage again." As the days passed, Sarah continued her quiet investigation, compiling records, bank statements, and hidden communications. At the same time, she presided over the custody trial with a measured hand, never letting her growing suspicions show. Mark, oblivious to her discoveries, carried on with his smooth arguments, confident that he still held the upper hand. One afternoon, Sarah decided to visit Grace's school, hoping to spend some time with her and subtly gauge if she knew anything about the money or if Mark had pressured her in any way. Grace, now a teenager, had become more reserved over the years, a stark contrast to the bright, bubbly child Sarah had once known. They sat on a bench near the school's garden, the sun casting long shadows on the pavement. Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to share with her daughter. She decided to start gently, asking about school and friends, trying to rebuild the connection that had been strained over time. "Mom, is something wrong?" Grace's voice broke through Sarah's thoughts, her eyes searching her mother's face. "You've seemed different lately." Sarah took a deep breath, deciding to reveal a part of the truth. "Grace, I've come across some things about your father and some financial matters. I need you to know that whatever happens, I'm here for you, and I'll do everything I can to protect you." Grace's expression shifted, a flicker of fear crossing her features. She lowered her gaze, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "Dad, he always said that you wouldn't understand, that you were too focused on your work to care about what was best for us." The words stung, but they confirmed Sarah's worst suspicions. Mark had been feeding their daughter lies, twisting the narrative to make Sarah seem like the antagonist. But beneath Grace's confusion, Sarah saw a glimmer of uncertainty, a desire for the truth. She gently reached out and took Grace's hand. "I know it's hard, and I know you love your father. But there are things he's done that aren't right. Things that have hurt both of us. I promise, I'm only trying to make things better. For you, for both of us." Grace didn't respond immediately, but Sarah sensed a shift in her demeanor, a softening that suggested a willingness to listen. It was a small victory, but in the battle against Mark's manipulation, it felt monumental. As the trial continued, Sarah's resolve only hardened. She worked late into the nights, gathering the final pieces of evidence, preparing for the moment when she would present her findings. She knew she couldn't confront Mark directly. Not yet, but she could use the trial to her advantage, creating an opening where the truth could come to light. Finally, the day arrived when Sarah had what she needed: a paper trail that connected Mark's client's shady financial dealings to his manipulation of Grace's accounts. It was risky, but she had no choice. She had to use the trial as the platform for exposure. In a tense courtroom, Sarah's sharp questions to the witnesses subtly shifted the focus onto the financial discrepancies she had uncovered. She could see the confusion in Mark's eyes as he realized the direction she was taking, his composed exterior beginning to crack. He attempted to redirect the arguments, but Sarah countered each move with precision, inching closer to the heart of the matter. And then, as the tension reached its peak, she called her final witness, an independent forensic accountant who had analyzed the financial records. The revelation was explosive. Mark's client had been using multiple accounts, including one linked to Grace, to funnel illegal funds. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, and Mark's expression turned pale as he realized the trap he had walked into. Sarah's voice remained steady, but her heart raced as she addressed the court. "These transactions point to a deliberate attempt to manipulate financial records and exploit the accounts of a minor. This goes beyond a simple custody battle. This is a matter of justice for those who have been wronged, including my own child." The courtroom descended into chaos as the implications of her words sank in. Mark's once impenetrable defense crumbled, his client's credibility shattered, and the judge called for a recess to evaluate the new evidence. As Sarah walked out of the courtroom, she felt the weight of years of struggle lift, replaced by a sense of purpose she hadn't known in years. But she knew this was only the beginning. Mark would not back down without a fight. And as the trial headed into its final stages, she prepared for the ultimate confrontation that could change everything for her, Grace, and even Mark himself. The courtroom was electric when the trial resumed. Word of Sarah's revelations had spread through legal circles, drawing curious spectators and media attention. Sarah sat in her chambers, reviewing her notes one last time, her mind sharp and focused. Outside, the murmurs of reporters and the buzzing crowd filled the halls, creating an atmosphere charged with anticipation. Mark, on the other hand, was a shadow of his former self. Gone was the confident swagger that had defined him for years. His usual self-assured smile had been replaced with a tight-lipped frown, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out. He knew that Sarah had cornered him, but he hadn't yet realized the extent of the damage. As Sarah took her place on the bench, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The gallery was packed, and every eye was fixed on her, waiting for her next move. The other judge overseeing the case called the courtroom to order, and the proceedings began. Mark attempted a last-ditch effort to discredit the forensic accountant's testimony, questioning the validity of the financial analysis. He spoke with desperation, his voice rising in pitch as he tried to regain control of the narrative. But Sarah had anticipated this move. She calmly countered his objections, pointing to additional evidence she had gathered: emails, hidden transfers, and confidential memos that linked Mark directly to the shady dealings. She could see the growing realization in Mark's eyes as each piece of evidence was laid bare. It was more than just about winning the case now. It was about exposing the truth that he had hidden for so long. Sarah's heart ached as she thought of Grace, caught in the middle of this storm, but she knew that revealing Mark's actions was the only way forward. In a climactic moment, Sarah called Grace to the stand. The courtroom fell silent as the teenager walked hesitantly to the witness box, her eyes darting nervously between her parents. Sarah kept her tone gentle, asking Grace about her understanding of the accounts and if she had ever felt pressured by her father to sign documents or make financial decisions she didn't fully understand. Grace hesitated, glancing at Mark, who looked on with a mixture of fear and anger. But Sarah's presence offered a quiet reassurance, and Grace took a deep breath before speaking. "Dad always told me that he was taking care of everything," she began, her voice trembling. "But there were times when he asked me to sign things and I didn't really understand what they were for. He said it was for my future, but I didn't know it would be used like this." Mark's face flushed with anger, and he leaned forward, attempting to object, but the other judge silenced him with a stern look. Sarah's heart broke at the sight of her daughter, caught in the painful tug-of-war between them. But she pressed on, asking Grace one last question that would seal Mark's fate. "Grace, did you ever feel that your father was using your accounts in ways that made you uncomfortable?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the tense silence of the courtroom. Grace swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes, Mom. I didn't want to believe it, but I think he was using my name to do things he didn't want anyone to find out about. I'm sorry, Dad." Her voice broke, and she looked at Mark with a mixture of sadness and betrayal. The courtroom erupted into a flurry of reactions. Mark's client, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, motioned to his own attorney, who quickly filed a motion to withdraw from the case, abandoning Mark in his moment of need. The media buzzed with questions, cameras flashing, capturing every moment of the downfall of one of the city's most renowned lawyers. But amid the chaos, Sarah remained focused. She looked at her daughter with pride and sadness, knowing that the revelations had come at a painful cost. She had uncovered the truth, but it had exposed the cracks in their already fragile family. As the court recessed, Sarah found herself alone with Mark in a side room, a silence stretching between them that was filled with years of unspoken words. Mark's shoulders sagged, the weight of his actions bearing down on him. He turned to her, his voice cracking. "Sarah, I didn't think it would come to this. I never wanted to hurt Grace. I thought I could manage it all, that I was doing what was best for her." Sarah felt a surge of anger but also a deep sadness. She had loved this man once, trusted him with her life. Now he was a broken version of himself, caught in the web of his own making. "You always thought you could control everything, Mark," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "But the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how much you try to bury it. You've hurt our daughter and you've hurt me. But this was your choice." Mark looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I didn't know how to stop, Sarah. I thought if I kept going I could fix things." "But you can't fix this," Sarah replied, her voice softening. "Now it's time for the consequences." The final verdict came swiftly. Mark's client lost the custody battle, and the findings from the trial triggered a separate investigation into Mark's involvement in financial misconduct. His reputation in the legal community was irreparably damaged, and he faced the prospect of disbarment and potential criminal charges. For Sarah, the outcome was a bittersweet victory. She had achieved justice, but the toll on her family weighed heavily on her heart. As she stepped out of the courthouse into the sunlight, she found Grace waiting for her, her expression uncertain but hopeful. Sarah walked over, wrapping her arms around her daughter, holding her tightly as if trying to make up for all the lost years in that single embrace. They stood together, the mother and daughter, as the press swarmed nearby, shouting questions about the trial, about Mark, about the fallout of the case. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Sarah whispered softly to Grace, promising her that they would face the future together, no matter how difficult the road ahead. Months later, as Sarah continued her work on the bench, she found a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey from despair to justice had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had made her stronger, more resilient. Grace slowly began to heal from the ordeal, and their relationship, though still scarred, started to mend. As for Mark, the last Sarah heard, he had moved out of the city, away from the life he had once ruled with confidence. He had become a cautionary tale, a man who had everything but lost it all to his own ambitions. Yet, in the quiet moments, Sarah found herself wondering if he ever regretted the choices that had brought him to this end. But she knew better than to dwell on the past. Her focus was on building a new life for herself and Grace, one built on truth, strength, and the unyielding belief that justice, though sometimes delayed, would always prevail. And as she walked into the courtroom each day, she carried that belief with her, a quiet reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.